We gather this hour.
We gather this hour.
We gather this hour
We gather this hour as people of faith.
As people of faith.
As people of faith.
As people of faith.
With joys and sorrows.
With joys and sorrows.
With joys and sorrows.
Gifts and needs.
Gifts and needs.
Gifts and needs.
We light this beacon of hope.
We light this beacon of hope.
We light this beacon of hope.
Sign of our quest for truth and meaning.
Sign of our quest for truth and meaning.
In celebration.
In celebration.
In celebration.
Of the life we share together.
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 We share together.
we share together.
We share together.
Yes.
So this month, as most of you know, we've been exploring this theme of beloved community, and I've been sort of twisting and turning in the wind on beloved community with its contradictions and its confoundingness. And so I wanted to offer this thought here. So we've been exploring this idea of beloved community, and it's this phrase, beloved community, is one we often associate with Dr. Martin Luther King because he spoke of it often. And because it's associated with Dr. King, we associate it with the civil rights movements of the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 1960s. And Dr. King actually would associate the term with an early 20th century philosopher named Josiah Royce. And for Royce, the beloved community was this kind of ideal community. Actually, he'd probably call it a lost cause, which I'll get into in a second. But Royce's ideal of the beloved community is a community that contains all the people who are fully dedicated to the cause of loyalty, truth, and reality itself, as he would say. The beloved community was ultimately the result of all of us living what he called a morally significant life. Now, Royce argued that the moral life was much more than simply following a prescribed set of moral rules. And I think that is important and resonates deeply with me. And the moral life isn't just reading what the rules are and following the rules. For him, the moral life meant asserting our will toward a particular plan of life, one that is freely chosen. And of course, the challenge is that we are unlikely to be able to discern and choose that plan on our own, given that our internal conflicting desires and impulses kind of move us back and forth. And I've experienced this myself. There's a lot of noise in our own heads, and it's hard for us to sort it out. Fortunately for us, we live in this vast social experience and have a vast history and a vast present of causes and programs that are more or less well-defined. Now, if I may oversimplify Royce a little bit, our choosing is simply a matter of finding those existent programs that resonate with us and join in. And Royce saw something that when we do that, when we find the sort of the existing program or the idea or the plan that resonates deeply with our hearts and we join in, a couple of things start to happen. First of all, he noticed that our will becomes focused on this shared cause. So our will, our moral will gets focused on a shared cause. And second, we become allied with a community of others in that shared cause. And what results from these commitments is what Royce called loyalty. Now, I have to be honest, loyalty, I struggle with that term because I think I like what Royce says about it, but it feels different to me. But we'll talk about that some other time. So to be clear, I don't think that Royce would assert that loyalty to a person, an individual, is part of his sense of what the moral life is. The loyalty is to the cause and to the community. Now, I doubt that any of that is particularly earth-shattering for any of you. But I wanted to offer this idea of beloved community, this sort of grounding from beloved community from Royce's viewpoint, because it's both encompassing of and transcendent of issues of racial justice, which is how we generally classify beloved community. It always seems to come out of racial justice issues. It includes that, and it also transcends that. By the way, I wanted to mention that Royce would call the idea of beloved community a lost cause. And by that, he means a cause that will not be accomplished in one's lifetime, but nonetheless requires you, calls us to contribute to its advancement anyway. So knowing that beloved community is not a cause that will be accomplished in our lifetime, it nonetheless calls us to contribute to its advancement. So in this month, in the series of homilies, I've been intentionally offering conflicting ideas and confounding ideas of beloved community. I started by saying that beloved community is not about you. It isn't about making your life easier or more comfortable, even more peaceful or predictable. And then I turned around and claimed that actually it is entirely about you. It's all about a radical restructuring of your and my relationship, our relationships to ourselves, to others, to this world, and to God. And just as you were thinking that this restructuring was in order to make material improvements in our society, I claimed last week that it wasn't, that beloved community was immaterial, that beloved community is a process and not an end, not a thing, not a program for improved economic policy, justice reform, or a Green New Deal. So I'm guessing you're seeing a pattern here, because now I'm going to offer this. Beloved community, it's always material. It is always material. These projects that Josiah Royce talks about, these plans of life that form a morally significant life, are projects with material ends, or at least material consequences, even if they are not ends. So going back to the civil rights era, for example, like the Montgomery bus boycott, right? Famously begun when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man, was a material consequence. The Voting Rights Act was another material consequence. And both of these were embedded in a larger moral project of civil rights. And that as well was embedded in an even larger project called the United States of America. And that itself was part of a larger unfinished moral project that claims that all people are created equal, and that by that equality they share an inherent worth of dignity. Jefferson called them rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The liberty to vote, the liberty to sit on a bus, regardless of one's race, skin color, nationality, gender identity, sexual orientation, neurodivergence, or any other human difference, are the materiality of fulfilling on the promise of America. But as we continue to experience in these days, these material consequences are not, of course, the ends. The material gains of the civil rights movements have never fulfilled the promise of America. These material gains are the signposts, the mile markers on much deeper moral commitments that make up what Royce calls the morally significant life. So my question, what then is the materiality of beloved community? What are the material ideas that we have that can serve as those signposts and mile markers as we follow our commitment to beloved community? And I'm speaking particularly about this community, this Unitarian Universalist Society of Mill Creek, this religious community. And specifically, I've heard in over time, over the last few years, but even very recently, I've heard from many of you ideas that could begin with our little community of Mill Creek, ideas like creating a community garden, or hosting a farmer's market, or learning better ways of welcoming people into our church, or finding more authentic ways to serve our larger community outside of the walls of this church. And I am absolutely certain that amongst you all, there are many other brilliant and fascinating and beautiful ideas and possibilities. So what I'm asking us to live into, to choose right now, is this confounding and contradictory idea of beloved community. I'm asking us to choose this idea, this moral project of beloved community. I'm asking us to choose it because it requires us, it calls us to contribute all we can to its fulfillment. I ask because it is a lost cause. It cannot be accomplished in our lifetime. I ask because it's not about us. It's not about myself individually, but it is entirely dependent on us, the changes we are willing to make in ourselves, the transformations we are willing to make in ourselves. I ask because in doing so, in committing to the idea of beloved community, we choose then to radically restructure our relationships. And in so doing, we find a deeper loyalty to the ever larger communities with all the attendant wild and glorious manifestations of humanity. Because we will know we are moving forward, we are moving toward it when we experience and create its material gains, never confusing the material gain for the cause, that morally significant life that Joyce urges us to. Because, friends, in the end, we are beloved, infused with mutual regard, mutual concern, mutual compassion. And because we are community, joined together to raise the bar on the common good, to engage the engines of transformation, not merely for our own ends, but for the wholeness of all of us without exception. Because in the end, friends, we are awakening to love. Amen. And may you live in blessing. And I love you.